Hey all, a friend asked me the other day, out of the blue, how do you cook tofu? She was making, I think, a curry or something like that and wanted to put tofu in it. And it gave me this idea that I should try to make some videos about sort of the basic building blocks of some vegan cooking. And tofu is definitely one of those. I think one of the first things, I've got my helper with me here, she's pretty happy, don't worry about it. Covered in food. As soon as you think vegetarian, vegan cooking, you probably think tofu. It's one of those things that is heavily associated with being vegetarian. Obviously, don't have to be. Tofu's, commonly used as an ingredient in lots of parts of the world, whether or not people are vegetarian. But it is, if you know how to cook it, it's delicious. Whether or not you're vegan, vegetarian, tofu can be really tasty. If you are vegan or vegetarian, it's an easy way to add sort of some protein and some substance to a meal. That, I guess what I want to urge when I'm talking about tofu here, you having fun? What I want to urge when I'm talking about tofu, okay, is that with vegan cooking especially, I think one of the traps people fall into is trying to think, okay, now I'm vegan or vegetarian, trying to go that way. I'm gonna cook the same stuff I always did and just replace the meat with something else. And I think that's an easy trap to fall into. I definitely cook with some meat substitutes. I don't necessarily think, oh, I want meat, I'll eat this instead, because it's been ages since I ate meat. But there's some types of things that are just tasty. If you pizza, for example, I like trying to find a vegan cheese alternative. Maybe like a vegan nugget or something. It's just sometimes you want something crunchy and dippable that is pretty easy to cook. Okay. I think she wants more hummus. But anyway, basics of cooking tofu. If you think of tofu as a worthwhile ingredient, worth preparing the right way, you open up a whole lot of fun with it. We're having too much fun on camera, it turns out. So there's all different kinds of tofu. I've got here one block of firm tofu and one block of extra firm tofu. There's other tofu products you can use that don't require much preparation, obviously. You can get things like, tofu nuggets like this that come sort of seasoned and cooked. There's smoked tofu like this. I really like this stuff in sandwiches. I slice it up and put it in sandwiches. And then I'm including it just because it's, in the soy family. It's, we'll call it like Indonesian tofu tempeh, which is probably a subject unto itself, and honestly, I think much easier to cook than tofu. But, worth considering as we're talking about this. The number one thing you need to know when you're cooking tofu is it does have some flavor of its own, right? Like if you like tofu, I'll eat a slice of tofu just like it is. I'm, used to it. But a lot of people, really want, and it makes sense to try to get some flavor into it. The best way to do that when you're cooking tofu, the number one rule you need to think about is trying to get as much water out of tofu as possible. So whatever you're using, whether it's firm tofu, extra firm, a soft tofu, I'm gonna put silken tofu to one side for now. It has its place, but for now we're thinking about sort of the firm tofus. You want to try to get as much water out of it as possible. There's a couple of ways to do that. One of the best things you can do is freeze tofu. So like I said, I've got two blocks of tofu here. One is firm, one is extra firm. This one I froze, this one I didn't. I took this one out of the freezer, defrosted it in the microwave pretty easily, and then I pressed both of them, with some tea towels and some heavy stuff on top to press as much water out as I could. Now, even though this is the extra firm and this is the firm, you might be able to see this one's pretty wobbly, and I don't know if that, can you get that, This one's pretty wiggly, and you can see it's a lot thicker. This one has much less water in it than this one does. So freezing it helps get water out. It also, when you defrost it, it ends up with a firmer, chewier texture when you cook it. So freezing your tofu before you use it is one of the easiest ways to make it hold up better to cooking. You don't have to. You can, do stuff with tofu that you haven't frozen. Hang on, hummus break. There you go, love. Got a combination of hummus, chia seeds, and beets over there. All good. But freezing your tofu really does, it gives it that extra texture. If you don't freeze it, it's fine. You still want to press it to get as much water out as you can. The other thing you can do to get water out of it and to add flavor to it is to boil it in salty water. So if you get a pot going with a pretty, what do you call it, hypertonic, I guess, a very salty solution. So boil water, put a lot of salt in there to get it pretty salty, and boil it. The salt gets into the tofu and I guess displaces some of the water. I'm not a scientist. The last thing you can do to sort of get more flavor in your tofu is to braise it. Now, I'm talking today mostly about sort of plain tofu that I haven't done much with. But if you want, you can take a block of tofu like this and either the whole block or slice it up into about the sizes you might be using. Now, I've been slicing beets for the baby with this knife, so my tofu is turning a little pink there, but I'm not worried about it. But, slice your tofu up into the size you might be using. Maybe it's strips like that. And then put it in either a pot of water, and in your water you can put some veggie stock. You could do something like sort of a 5-spice flavoring with maybe some cinnamon, fennel seeds, star anise. You okay? I don't know. A little cardamom, something like that. Maybe a little soy sauce, and boil it or pressure cook it. And you can do that in your Instant Pot. You can start from a frozen block of tofu in there, get it out the packet, put it in the Instant Pot with the broth flavorings, and cook it in the Instant Pot or pressure cooker for about 15-20 minutes. It'll both thaw out, but as well, cooking it at that high temperature with that will get a lot of the flavor into it. So you can do the whole block or you can thaw it out and do smaller pieces like this. So that's the basics of getting your tofu ready to cook. Second hummus break. Once you've prepped your tofu by freezing it, getting as much water out as you can, then you think, how am I going to cook it? Now, there are a few different ways to think about this, and mostly it depends on what you're using it for. If you're making a sandwich and you want some sliced tofu in there, you're going to want to get a block like this and cut slices off it, and then maybe pan fry it. Now, you could slice it up and marinate it for a little bit, or you could braise it and then slice it up, and then just pan fry on both sides. It'll crisp up a little bit, you cook a little bit more water out, so it'll be a little chewier, have a bit of substance to it. For the sandwich, you want some tofu? Oh yeah. Eat it plain. So, pan frying slices. Now, if you're doing something like what I'm doing tonight, which is making a curry, you want cubes, more or less, cubes of tofu. And there's a few ways of getting your tofu pretty tasty for that. You can certainly just cut it into cubes, and when you're making, let's say, a curry or whatever else you're making with it, a stir fry, you can toss those in when you're cooking. Tofu doesn't need to be cooked to be ready. Really, the cooking process is more about getting the texture and the flavor into it. My favorite for something like a curry or a stir fry is to cook the tofu first and then have that pre-cooked tofu ready to add in. That'll take some more water out of it. It'll get a texture on it. You could bake it or you could pan fry it, and it'll crisp up on the outside while still staying soft on the inside. So what I'm going to do with these strips like this, is I'm going to go ahead and put those in a pan. Are you done? Oh, we're running out of time. I'm going to throw these strips like this in my pan, and just for the sake of comparison, I'll do it with this tofu here, which is the stuff that I did not freeze before using. Boom. Boom. And I'm going to throw all this in the pan with a little bit of oil on top, and I'm going to bake it. Now, if you bake it, like I said, in the oven, a lot of that water's going to cook out. A little bit of oil over the top. It'll help get the outside nice and crispy. And then when you go to throw it in, before I throw it into, let's say, my curry tonight, I'll take each one of these strips that'll be nice and crispy all over the outside, and I'll chop that up into the cubes of the size I want. So you'll have sort of a contrast between the crispy outside. Get in there, that's my canola oil. Yeah, okay. The crispy outside and the soft inside, so visually you'll be able to see it. And when it cooks in the curry broth, it'll absorb a lot of those flavors while still holding up that same texture. Yeah, so bake your tofu and then cut it up and cook it. The other thing is it'll absorb a lot of flavor when you're cooking it. So if it's in a curry, it'll absorb a lot of the flavors in that. A stir fry, as you add whatever seasonings you're using in your stir fry, a little soy sauce, sesame oil at the end, whatever sauce you've got, it'll absorb a lot of those flavors. It'll be crispy, it'll be chewy, it's delicious. I'm hoping to make a few more of these videos sort of talking about some of the basic building blocks of my vegan cooking at least. I hope they're helpful. I'll whack a little video on at the end of tonight's dinner. And I'll come back at you with, I'm thinking sort of some, how to clean. Now, I'll come back at you with some videos about what I think is one of the most essential sauces for vegan cooking, which is my cashew cheese sauce. And I might work through sort of the mother sauces of Chris's vegan cooking. But for now, basics of cooking tofu explained. Pretty easy stuff. If you put a little bit of work in at the front end, nothing too major, you get really delicious, healthy results. Oh, I'd eat that.